Hello everyone, I am FIDE instructor and Arena International Master Rishikesh Chavan. Welcome to Chess Made Simple. Today in Basic Tactics, we are going to learn about attacking the castled king. So let's start. So whenever king is uncastled, normally we can checkmate the king on the weak f7 square, or you can say we can checkmate the black king on f7, and we can checkmate the white king on f2 if the king is uncastled. But once the king is in the castling, now the checkmate points shift. Now here we can checkmate the king either on the g7 or h7 square if it's black, and if we want to checkmate white king, then we can checkmate the white king on either g2 or h2 square. So remember these 2 points as possible checkmate squares in case the king is castled. So let's start. In this position, as you can see, there are no defenses in front of the black king, and we have this queen and bishop. So it's a very easy tactics. You can say it's mate in 4. So we start with bishop into h7 check, compulsory king h8, and now there we are going to give discovered check with bishop h6, oh sorry, bishop g6, king g8, and then checkmate follows with queen h7 check, forced king f8, and finally queen into f7 checkmate. So from this it's mate in 2, but to get this position we need to calculate bit more. So from this position we have arrived at this mate in 2 position, and then I hope you remember all the meta checkmate patterns. This checkmate patterns really helps, so I suggest you all to keep solving lots and lots of mate in 1s and mate in 2 puzzles. So here it's mate in 2, queen h7 check, and finally queen into f7 mate. Next, move ahead with the next puzzle. Here, this king is kind of more protected compared to the previous puzzle. Here, there are 3 pawns in front of the king, but because this pawn is moved ahead, all the dark squares around the king are weak. So we are going to use that weakness. So we are going to play queen into h7 check. Now we are sacrificing the queen. Of course, black cannot play king f8, otherwise queen h8 is a quick mate. So he must take the sacrifice, and then there follows rook h3 check, king g8 forced, and finally rook f8, rook h8 mate. Now remember this checkmate as a mating pattern. This is again a commonly used mating pattern. Let's move ahead. Now here there is no wall of pawns in front of the king, but there are few black pieces. They are trying to defend the king, but still we can score our goal, or we can score a mate. So it goes like this: queen g7 check, compulsory bishop into g7, then there follows bishop into g7 check, and finally bishop f6 checkmate. So this is a discovered check we are giving after bishop into bishop f6. So again you can remember this checkmate pattern. This will surely be useful in your games. Next position please. Okay, now here again the castling is kind of broken. G pawn is not present, so there is a big hole on g7. Also there are minor pieces defending the king. There are not any major pieces, and again this file is controlled by white. This diagonal is controlled by white. Even white is challenging black on this diagonal. This file is weak, so there are lots of open lines. Remember, if you want to checkmate your opponent's castle king, you must open a diagonal or a file. That way, you can reach the destination, or you can perform the checkmate very quickly. So let's move ahead with this puzzle. The correct continuation is queen g7 check. We are sacrificing the queen because there is checkmate to follow in two more moves. Rook d8 check. There is no other move but to keep the bishop on f8. So after bishop f8, there follows rook into f8 checkmate. Again, this mating pattern is famous, or you can say you can see this mating pattern quite often in practical play. So I suggest you all to remember all these mating patterns. If you want to learn more mating patterns, you should keep solving lots and lots of such puzzles. We'll move ahead. Okay, again, this is similar kind of position. G pawn is absent. There is not enough protection in front of the king. There are no black pieces present in front of the king to defend the king. So the uh, punishment is very easy. Bishop h6 check. Now king must take the bishop. It doesn't matter actually whether the king captures the bishop or not. For example, if the king goes back, that is g8, then there follows queen g5 check, forced king h8, and then queen g7 mate. Or else after bishop h6, if he goes to h8 first instead of g8, if he goes to h8, then there follows queen f6 check, forced king g8, and then queen g7 mate. Black must have calculated all this. That's why he goes for king into bishop. But still, it's a checkmate coming up. Queen f6 check, forced king h5, and finally g4. It's a checkmate. As you can see, king is totally helpless. There are no defenders present in front of the king. There is no safety of pawn walls. So whenever you find such situations where your opponent's king is not guarded well, there are not enough pieces in front of the king, there are no pawns present, then you can start calculating and you can think about launching a direct mating attack on opponent's king. Let's move ahead. Okay, here it looks kind of difficult for white to give a checkmate because there are these two pawns. Uh, okay, those pawns are weak. It's not actually a proper pawn wall, but pawn nonetheless. So these pawns can you can say can create some problems for white to launch his attack. But white calculates accurately, so he starts with queen g3. Now white is threatening queen g7 checkmate, so black must play rook g8. There follows queen c3 check. Now remember, these pawns are on white squares, and pawns on white squares controls only white squares. So there is no one controlling these dark squares. And exactly that is what white is utilizing. White is using this dark square weakness around black's king. So queen c3 check, forced f6. Here black can even play rook g7, but then it would be a quick checkmate after queen into g7. So f6 delays the checkmate by just a move. It doesn't make any difference whether black plays f6 or whether he plays rook g7 first. So queen into f6 check. Now it is forced to play rook g7, and finally queen into g7 mate. Next position, please. Okay, this looks a bit difficult for white to achieve because okay, G pawn is absent again, but king can run away through this way, and not actually over here, but definitely he can run away. And once the king is surrounded by black pieces, then it will be difficult for white to launch any direct mating attack. So that is why the continuation is bishop f6. Bishop f6 is a brilliant move. Of course, black cannot capture the move bishop, because if black captures the bishop, then he loses the queen for a bishop. So maybe he will play something like bishop f8 to challenge the bishop on f6. But then there follows queen g7 checkmate. Here, instead of bishop f6, let's try playing something like this: check, check again, and then you can see the king runs away, right? So it's not a checkmate. So if you want to checkmate your opponent's king, make sure there are no escape squares for the king. King should not escape from the mating net. That is why in this position bishop f6 is must. We are trapping the king on the back rank. We are trapping the king in the small area where he can be checkmated very quickly. Let's move ahead. Okay, this looks again bit difficult to achieve because only queen and knight is there. No other white piece can contribute in the attack. This file is open, but of course knight doesn't move in a standing line. Knight jumps, and there are not enough squares for knight to jump. So it looks like black king is, though black king is weak, but he's safe because queen is alone and queen cannot achieve anything on her own. But there is a way to launch a direct mating attack on the black king. So it goes like this: rook f4. Why rook f4? Why why white is sacrificing the rook? Because white is threatening rook g4 check, king h8, and then queen g7 checkmate. That is why it is compulsory for black to accept the sacrifice. Then white plays g into f4, and now finally the file is open. This is what we discussed just before this position, right? We discussed that king is open through this file, but there are no open files for white. So here white is opening up a file by sacrificing a rook, and now he is going to play rook g1 check. So there is no move for black actually. Whatever black plays, maybe he can play something like rook e8. Then there follows rook g1 check, king h8, and then finally queen g7 checkmate. Next position, please. Okay, this position looks more challenging because though there are f and g pawns absent from this position, but there are lots of pieces around the king. So even this rook is guarding this back rank, queen is there, rook is there, even this knight can jump on the king side anytime. So it looks like there are enough black pieces to defend the king. But you need to check the lines, you need to open the lines. If we are talking about the lines, so let's see, this line is open, even this g file is open for us. So we need to make king bit vulnerable. We need to make king easily, you can say, attackable. So here we are going to sacrifice the queen with queen into h7 check. Now black cannot capture it with the king, because if he captures with the king, then there follows rook h5 checkmate. So it's a mate in two. That is why he is forced to capture with the rook. The moment this rook moves to h7, now this diagonal is open. And now we can checkmate the black king on the back rank with rook g8 check, force rook into rook, and finally rook into g8 checkmate. We will conclude this topic with this classic position. So here king is covered from all the sides, all the three pawns are present. Only problem with black's position is there are no pieces present in front of the king. So there's this only thin cover of pawns to guard the black's king. So white is going to use this thin cover to launch a direct checkmate attack. So he plays queen g6. Of course, black has to accept the sacrifice, or else queen h7 is a checkmate on the next move. If he plays something like knight f6 to guard this checkmate, then there follows knight into f6. It's kind of remove the defender. uh, Black cannot capture the knight because pawn is pinned, so he is forced to move the king on h8, and there follows queen h7 checkmate. What else he can do after queen g6? Maybe he can try and capture the knight, so that way there won't be any checkmate coming up on h7, right? But then there follows pawn into g5, and now the file is open. So this is what we discussed in the start of this topic. If you want to launch a direct attack to your opponent's king side or the castle king, you have to open lot of lines, maybe a file or a diagonal. So here we are opening this diagonal, and now queen h7 is a mate. So if he captures the queen, then now this diagonal is also open, and there follows knight e7 checkmate. So that is why after queen g6 check, it is compulsory for black to capture the queen. And again, as we discussed just now, after f into g6, this diagonal is open, and white is going to use that diagonal with knight e7 double check, forced king h8, and finally knight into g6 checkmate. So you can see how we can attack on the castle king. Normally, castle king can be checkmated on either g file or on h file. Also, we need to open a few lines. We need to open at least a diagonal or a file if you want to give a direct checkmate to the opponent. So keep looking for the weaknesses, like if there are enough pieces present in front of the king to guard him, or if there are enough pawns in front of the king, if there is any pawn weakness, if there are few dark squares weak, or if there are few white squares which are weak. So we can use all these small weakness, and then on the basis of this weakness we can launch our attack, we can build our attack. I hope you understood whatever concepts we discussed over here. Of course, this is the first part of attacking the castle king. We'll be getting more parts on how to attack on the castle king. So I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you very much, everyone.